I'm Jane Garrity. Welcome to my podcast, A Gift of Time. It is my memoir of my spiritual awakening and how I healed old wounds, trauma, PTSD, and most importantly, my addiction to alcohol. When I hit menopause, my life had to change. Thank you for listening. As always, please subscribe. If my story resonates with you, it's going to resonate with someone that you know. Please share it. I'm a small digital creator, just sharing my story in the hopes that someone will find it inspiring enough to take a look within themselves and to heal their old wounds too. A Gift of Time, Episode 3, 2022. If someone would have ever told me that I would experience the last period in my life while standing on the ridgeline of a 14,000-foot mountain in Colorado, I would have laughed. How absurd. I had pre-gamed the whole week leading up to this hike. No booze, tons of water, electrolytes, nutritious whole foods. You get the idea. The no booze thing was a challenge for me, but I always gave it up before a big, long hike. I've hiked hungover before, a few times actually, and although it was successful, it was way harder than it should have been. So on that Saturday morning, I woke up at 2:30 a.m., grabbed all of my pre-packed gear, water, food, and headed west. We were hiking Mount Sherman, one of the easier of the 58, and as always, at that time in the morning, before a new big hike, I felt nauseous. Since being on the tail end of perimenopause, I had just gotten my period the day before, and after not having one for 6 months prior, it was a doozy. Being an avid hiker and camper, having to change tampons and pads in the wild wasn't new to me. I made sure I had extra supplies and a plastic bag. Carry in, carry out. It was cold and dark when we started hiking up the trail, and we watched the sunrise from 13,000 feet. By this time, I could feel blood pooling in my pad. I had a tampon in too, so this meant I was bleeding through that as well. When you are above tree line, that means there's no place to duck around and pee, let alone having to change a bloody mess. Luckily, it wasn't crowded and still just after sunrise. So I pulled down my pants and changed myself right there on the wide open trail, bare-assed and indifferent. I felt tired and sluggish. It's kind of wild when you're hiking that high up. The air is thinner and you feel like you're going in slow motion. One foot in front of the other. I got this. What was wrong with my body? It's like it just doesn't want to move. I made it past the call and headed up the steep incline to the ridge. Why do my legs feel like lead? Is it my period? I haven't had a drink in 7 days. I should be well hydrated. Maybe I should try to eat something. I'm so nauseous. My body feels weird. Is it exhaustion? I took a sip of my electrolyte drink and grabbed a snack out of my pack. It was difficult for me to get it down as my mouth filled with saliva, and just the smell of it turned my stomach. Mind over matter, Jane. I love chocolate. Yum. As I gulped down a bite of a wafer that felt chalky in my slimy mouth. I made it to the top of the ridge, just a couple 100 feet in elevation left, and I'll hit the summit. My legs were shaking, and I was developing a headache. I'm not sure if I could go on. How much farther? I need a break. I made the decision to abandon the summit, since my legs, arms, and whole body felt tingly and weak. The high altitude exacerbated my symptoms, and I was grateful that my hiking partner was willing to stay with me and didn't summit either. Over the last 2 years experiencing menopause, I've related it to feeling like my body was now an imposter. All of the things that I used to do with it, I no longer had the energy or the mindset for. It happened slowly, over months, years, and it still snuck up on me. I felt like my body was shutting down, and I wasn't ready. When we moved to Colorado in 2021, my alcohol consumption ebbed and flowed. I was constantly trying to moderate it. During this time, my husband and I were having relationship issues, and my alcohol consumption was out of control. On the weekends, I would stay up by myself into the early morning hours just drinking, listening to music, scrolling on social media, until my husband would hear me in the early morning hours and get out of bed. "What are you doing?" he'd ask. It would prompt me to follow him into the bedroom and pass out. 2020 and the pandemic was a pivotal time for all of us, and I managed and coped with the changes by drinking boxes of wine throughout the week. In the early stages of lockdown and making the switch from in-office work to working from home, I would have fits of uncontrollable outbursts. For me, it felt like I was in a prison. Little did I know that that prison was my own. I was 49 years old and unaware of how my body changes were affecting me. I blamed everything on perimenopause in jest, and it turns out it was accurate. I was working for a large tech company and managing a team of 21 people during the pandemic. The move from the office from home for me was a challenge that I was not expecting. Prior to lockdown, I had been asking my manager to either hire someone else to take some of my people or give me a raise for what felt like 2 years. My workload and the size of my team was becoming unmanageable. I always got the same answers. It's not the right time to ask for a raise, Jane, but I'll advocate for you. We don't have it in the budget to hire somebody else to split the team. Our earnings per share need to come up 1 more cent, then it'll be a better time to ask. The hardest part for me when the lockdown happened was being the manager, therapist, cheerleader, and advocate for my large team, while also managing partner relationships and the politics of it all. And let's not forget presenting, forecasting, and having to constantly defend my numbers. My days were filled with back-to-back meetings with barely time to make a sandwich because there was a silent underlying expectation that we were to always show online and available. By the time 5 o'clock would come around, I would still be sitting at my desk trying to get some actual work done with a glass of wine in hand. Alcohol became my daily method of winding down and forgetting about the challenges of work, the stress of the pandemic, and how much worse it was for a social butterfly like me by not being in the office. I eventually found some balance, made it as fun as possible with work and my team, and I learned to let things go. I had to stop caring about everything and just focus on my team's health. These drinking habits of mine were not new, but my personal relationship and living space was. I would joke that my husband met me at the worst time in my life as I was just beginning my menopause journey, and the voyage was that of a ship in the middle of the ocean. Sometimes it would experience drought from the relentless hot sun, wishing I could just drink some salty seawater. And others, it felt like tidal waves crashing so hard onto me that I felt like I was drowning. It was a rare day when I would actually feel comfortable in my body. It took me years after my divorce for me to get back on my feet financially. When I bought a townhome in Milford, New Hampshire, I adopted a dog. I had abandoned the dating scene, and this dog was my new partner for life. No more men and failed relationships for me. My husband lived in the same community, and I would see him out walking his own dog. I took note that he also picked up her poop. One day, I was outside, and he was driving into the community, and he stopped, and he said hi. That very evening was the first time we walked our dogs together, and have been every day since. After a month of knowing him, I moved in. Then 6 months later, we were in lockdown. My alcohol consumption during the weeknights were mostly composed, but by the time Friday came around, it was like I was having my own frat party. Sometimes I would black out. The next day, my husband would ask me if I remembered the things I said the night before, and I didn't. My triggers and pain that hid at the bottom of the bottle would always rise to the surface. We would fight, yell, and say things that we didn't mean. We would talk the next day about things we needed to work on and how can we break old patterns. The challenge that we would come to find out is that neither one of us knew how to share our deepest feelings or thoughts with the other, so open communication would still be something that we both danced around instead. He would always seem to know when I would have those feelings like I was in prison, and he would get me up early on a Saturday and drive me up to the White Mountains so that I could get my bearings back. It always worked. It was as if he already knew me better than myself. A year and a couple months after we met, we got married. I know I said that I would never get married again after that first experience, but he was different. He was respectful and he held himself accountable. And he had this thing that he was able to do, which I thought was magic. If I told him something he was doing bothered me, he never did it again. And he would never come up again. It would vanish. I thought he was a magician. I had never met anyone that was capable of doing that, myself included. I'm still a work in progress. And when it comes to that, he will gently remind me at those times when I forget. We had talked at length about how we wanted to retire, and moving out west was something we both saw in the very distant future. Until on a cold January day in 21, he came home and said there might be an opportunity with his company to work in Colorado. Without hesitation, I said, hell yeah. I had asked my manager about working remotely full time, and without hesitation, he said yes. But that didn't last for long, as he reached out to me a few days later to let me know that HR wouldn't allow my position to be fully remote. You mean that after reworking remotely for a year, managing 21 people, hiring a couple more, and putting out the numbers that we were putting out with huge success, it wasn't approved by HR? What the fuck? I had just expected that after showing the success along with my manager's approval, it was an easy win. I was wrong. My manager was great. He said he understood where I was at and also didn't agree with HR. He knew I could do it. I had already proven that, but in the end, I managed too many people to do it remotely. I chalked it up to corporate bureaucracy. He threw out the idea of a new position for me that I would be able to work remotely with. At first, I was grateful. Wow, he must think I'm worth it to keep on staff. And to create a whole new position for me, I felt worthy. I had actually made it work in corporate. So when he came to let me know that he was close to getting this done for me, I felt there was something holding me back. This position felt more of a step back and not in the career building way. I had spent 13 years rebirthing a career in corporate, and 7 of them were with this company. I felt torn. I had established rapport and became a good leader and experienced many mistakes as a manager and leading my team. A team that learned with me. I wasn't a good manager or even a leader, let alone a good one when I stepped into that role. But I was a great leader by the time I left. My team always gave me grace and accepted that I was learning too. And I managed this by trying to hold myself accountable, share my own vulnerabilities, and I tried to be as relatable as I could. So on the cusp of accepting this new position with the company, I had a restless night's sleep. Shit, I barely slept at all. I'm not supposed to take this position. It's not where I want to go with my career. I wanted to move forward, not sideways. I woke up the next morning and talked with my husband about it. He said, "You do what feels right for you. I support you in your decision and I trust you." He has taught me more about freedom and love and about myself than anyone else has so far in my life. Now that I had established a career in corporate tech with over a decade of experience, I could easily find another role that aligns with my professional goals and one that also aligns with my new location. I gave my resignation. My intuition was telling me to let it go. It was time for me to move on, leave on a high note, and that I did. After we moved across the country and then moved again with the purchase of our home in Colorado, I fell into a state of depression. It happened gradually. It was as if my body said, "We can relax now." I was 51. I remember counting out loud to my husband that this move was the 9th time for me in the last 10 years. Something came over me. I was all of a sudden exhausted. I needed more sleep than I was used to. My periods were erratic. I was getting migraines again and drinking daily. I knew I had an alcohol problem. I had known about it for years. I had been dabbling with moderation and would take a week or 2 off here and there, but I would always go back down the slippery slope of disassociation. I didn't even know that's what it was, disassociation. I actually hadn't heard that term until recently. When the fight started happening with my husband, it was emotionally exhausting for both of us. My anxiety was at an all-time high, and I would even find myself pacing, waiting for him to come home after work. We were in a new routine. He would stop at the bar on his way home. I would feel anxious with the back and forth in my own mind, placing rules upon myself, and my thoughts would create so many elaborate stories. You said you weren't going to drink tonight, Jane. Oh, I'll just have a couple. There's nothing wrong with just a couple. Maybe he doesn't love me anymore. Why can't he just come home after work? Why can't I feel peaceful being by myself? What's wrong with me? As I would leave the office for home in the evenings, each stoplight was a challenge. I'm going to stop and pick up some wine. No, no drinking tonight. Just one bottle. It's fine. One bottle turns into raiding the liquor cabinet because one bottle isn't enough. No, I said I was taking tonight off. I've passed 5 liquor stores on the way home without stopping. See, I got this. Just kidding. I'll pop into the one near the house and just get a box. That way, I won't have to stop again tomorrow. I would get home, break open that box, and fill my glass. It's okay. I'll do better tomorrow. After that hike and taking a week off from drinking, I would stop and buy a box of wine. I would go home, drink glass after glass, and pass out. It wasn't long after we moved into our new home when I started having experiences. When I laid my head to sleep at night and closed my eyes, I would see visions, portraits of people, Indigenous American people. And I thought, crap, was our house built on an old burial ground or something? We are in what was once the Wild West, after all. I put the immediate vision of the scene in the Poltergeist movie of all the dead bodies floating up in the backyard out of my mind. Along with these visions, I would also see things out of the corner of my eye. Was that a black dog? A gray shepherd? Since I was drinking most every night at this point, I figured I was hallucinating, and perhaps I needed a night or two to dry out. It kept happening, though, and one day I decided to call my dad, who is our family historian, and described one of the portraits that I saw. It was of a young Union soldier, and next to him stood an Indigenous woman. He asked where I saw this picture, and I quickly dismissed it. How could I tell him that it was in my drunken mind? He told me that the soldier was an ancestor on his mother's side, and that he thought that the woman was his wife. He had found out that his great-great-great-grandfather had married an Indigenous woman, and back then, she had to change her name to Mary, something more English. By that October, my relationship with my new husband was at an all-time low. I was out of control with my consumption. It would take him longer and longer after work to get home, and it seemed like he was avoiding coming home at all. It made me feel anxious. I wondered to myself if he was going to leave me. I wouldn't blame him. I wouldn't have stayed with me. I would then drink more, feel even more anxious because his avoidance felt like, to me, that he didn't want to be with me or here at all. I was again failing at a relationship, someone else who didn't want me anymore. Sometimes, as I sipped my wine while waiting for him to come home, I would think, what if I just wasn't here anymore? On this planet. It scared me. When I noticed one day that he wasn't wearing his wedding ring, I lost it. What the fuck? You don't want to be married to me anymore? Then why are you still here? Why can't you just tell me you want a divorce? He told me that he hadn't worn it for over a week, and I was just noticing it now. I had to wake up. I had to wake myself up. How did I get here to this low, rock bottom place? I made the decision to quit drinking for good and to go to therapy. It took every inch of my being and effort to choke out the words to him. I'm quitting drinking for good this time. Like I'm never going to drink again. He's heard it all before. Same old Jane. I also made an appointment with a therapist that specialized in addiction. Getting the courage to look at myself and realize I needed help was one of the darkest times in my life, and I had to pull myself out of it. I'm not doing this for you. I'm doing this for me. I came to the realization that he and I weren't connecting because I was disconnected from myself. I want a relationship with you. I want to share a life with you, but I need to fix myself. He, of course, supported my decision, but not without apprehension. I had tried moderating and quitting before, only to have one drink and then slide back into the daily bottle of wine like a swirly water slide. I told him that I can't be a good partner for him without focusing on myself and my own health, that I was doing this for me and not him. So I quit drinking, for good this time, and I began therapy. I had been to therapy before at various times in my life, but this was the first time a therapist would talk to me about abandonment wounds. Abandonment? I've never once thought in my life that I was abandoned. I was loved by so many in my family. How could this be? I was the lucky one who had 2 dads growing up, sisters and bountiful aunts and uncles and grandparents that always showed me love. I learned that when we are children, when we're not emotionally supported, when we make mistakes or choices that have consequences, and instead are met with anger and punishment, is called abandonment. It's taken me 2 years to fully understand what this wound actually is, and it has nothing to do with someone physically leaving you. I'll explain. It's when our parents, partners, teachers, and people in positions of perceived authority abandon us by not showing us love or compassion during those times when we need them the most. Instead, they show their anger, give the silent treatment, and punish us, whether it's in the form of a spanking, taking things away from us, casting judgment, and creating a condition. This in turn creates feelings of shame. Shame, because now we aren't lovable. We didn't follow the rules. We made mistakes, and for that, we were punished. How many times has someone said to me, "You should feel ashamed of yourself, Jane"? How many times have I said that to someone else? My own children. How did I get to the age of 52 and not know this? You mean to tell me that I have been reading Brené Brown's books for over a decade and I missed this super important lesson about where shame actually comes from? Holy shit. Abandonment is when we do not give a loving space for our loved ones to just simply be by offering support, letting them experience their mistakes, consequences, and heartaches based upon their own choices. In order for me to heal these very wounds, come back to myself and connect with myself and connect with my husband, family, children, and loved ones, I had to learn how to heal that space inside of me. This concludes episode 3, 2022. Thank you for listening. Please subscribe. If my story is resonating with you, it's resonating with somebody that you know. Please share. I appreciate your listening. Thank you.